everyone. As a world, we owe much of Martin Luther King Jr. We challenge hypocrisy and narrow-minded thinking, and in return, won the respect of the world communities. The King holiday is an opportunity for all of us to pay tribute to Dr. King's achievements in guaranteeing fundamental civil and human rights for the many who had previously been denied them. In remembering Dr. Martin Luther King's life today, we are given the chance to renew our commitment to realizing those timeless ideals of perfect equality and lasting human dignity. Because of Dr. King's vision and integrity, the world is a better place to live now. People of all races, religions, classes, politics, and situations in life are coming together in a spirit of unity. We are doing it today, but we should be doing it every day. We are today setting in motion a great celebration of freedom and justice in honor of America's hero and patriot. I'm proud to have this responsibility to lead an organization as the Black Students Union at Augsburg, which allows me to utilize my skills, talents, and freedom of speech as a human being. This special recognition of Dr. King provides a unique opportunity for all people to reaffirm their faith in the values of humanity. This national holiday should be global, but we start here. It starts with me as a campus leader to make a difference. It starts in the hearts of all people to seek to achieve equality and justice, freedom and peace for the world. Let us participate in activities that seek to achieve equality and be a part of history. We hope this convocation will rekindle in us the fires of love, irrespective of our color, race, or religion, so that Dr. King's dream for a united world will one day come true. And remember that just as the black and white keys on a piano are both inevitable for perfect harmony in music, so is it with race. And remember the song of Paul McCartney, Ebony and Ivory. To live in perfect harmony, the Caucasian and the Negroid race have to stick together to create a wonderful world of harmony for you and me. It is now or never. Tomorrow may be too late. On behalf of the Office of the Black Students Affairs, and on my own behalf, I would like to say a big welcome to all of you present, and thank you.
I'd like to begin by using a few words from the eulogy given by Benjamin Mays, who was president of Morehouse College, where Martin Luther King attended and graduated. Surely, surely this man was called of God to do his work. If Amos and Micah were prophets in the 8th century, Martin Luther King Jr. was a prophet in the 20th century. If Isaiah was called of God to prophesy in his day, if Hosea was sent to preach love and forgiveness centuries ago, Martin Luther King was sent to expound the doctrine of nonviolence and forgiveness in the 3rd quarter of the 20th century. If Jesus was called to preach the gospel to the poor, Martin Luther was called to bring dignity to the common person. If a prophet is one who interprets in clear and intelligible language the will of God, Martin Luther King Jr. fits that designation. If a prophet is one who does not seek popular causes to espouse, but rather the causes which he thinks are right, Martin Luther qualified on that score. No, he was not ahead of his time. No person is ahead of their time. Every person is within their time. Each person must respond to the call of God in their lifetime and not somebody else's time. Jesus had to respond to the call of God in the first century and not in the 20th century. He had but one life to live. Jesus could not wait. How long do you think Jesus would have had to wait for the duly constituted authorities to accept him? 25 years? 100 years? 1,000 years? Never? He died at 33. He could not wait. In that spirit of urgency, we begin in the name of our God who has created us, who redeems us, and who sanctifies us. Amen.
The For Heaven's Sake group will lead us in this anthem. And Gabe, they're going to do the first section by themselves, and afterwards we'll all join and stand and singing the anthem. This is the For Heaven's Sake developmental daycare under the direction of Ms. Jean Dixon.
Before we do the Black National Anthem, we always open with prayer. anthem will be "We Are the World," and the last verse. We are the world. We are God's children. We are the ones who make a brighter day. So let's start giving. There's a choice we're making. We're saving our lives. Yes, it's true, we make a better day. Just you and me. Just you and me. We are the school. We are the future. We'll be the best that we can be. Just wait and see. We are the world. We are the children. We are the ones who make a brighter day. So let's start giving. There's a choice we're making. We're saving our lives. Yes, it's true, we make a better day. Just you and me. Just you and me. Just you and me.
I like to say amen, and we could go on home. Tommy Numbala was responsible for going to pick up the group this morning, and he walked in the auditorium and said, "The celebrities are here." And indeed they are, and I'd like to thank this wonderful group we happen to be on programs together, and I think the group that I initially was on program with are now alums. And they do have an alumni chapter to this daycare center, and I'm glad that they are here with us. This group is also special because on many occasions they had been on programs with our own Dr. Richard Green, and they were on a program a few weeks ago when he was receiving a posthumously award over at North High. And I knew they had to be here for our Martin Luther King Convocation, and I'm glad they were able to work us in their schedule. This opening decade allows me to initiate Black History Year. It is indeed a time to honor and learn of the contributions of Africans throughout this country and the world. As we pay homage to our ancestors, we are mindful of our collective cooperation. Yes, even at Augsburg College, we celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. Not only do I acclaim Martin Luther King Jr., but Augsburg College, all of us need to come on up to the 90s. Sometimes there's resistance and change, and I assure you I've received my fair dosage here periodically. But I believe sometimes we're in the midst of making history, and oftentimes, as it is said, you don't see the forest for the trees. So on this awesome occasion, we gather to give our respect and to salute one of the world's true great contributors. He is caring, sharing, understanding, warm, giving, knowing, supportive, dedicated, committed, busy, and much more. He is with us today. To share with us the continuing agenda is Reverend James Thomas. He is the assistant to the bishop of the Minneapolis area Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Prior to coming to Minneapolis in 1987, he was pastor of the Lutheran Church of the Advent in New York. He received his doctorate from the Graduate Theological Foundation in Notre Dame in Indiana, and is a PhD candidate at the University of Minnesota, majoring in educational policy and public affairs. A few of his many board memberships are President and board member of the African American Lutheran Association, representative for the Minneapolis Area Senate on the Board of Regents, Augsburg College, member of Minnesota Interfaith Council on Affordable Housing, and secretary to ELCA's Advisory Committee on Namibia. His publications include Namibia, The World is Watching, and Welcoming Strangers. Human beings are at best when they are socially responsible. This kind of responsibility is not only a preeminent Christian virtue, but a sound human value. Reverend Dr. James R. Thomas is foremost a man of faith. For the bottom line of faith is to see what you believe and to believe what you do not see. Reverend Thomas shared with me a time when he too had been quite sick. Just as I pulled through and became listed as a member of one of life's miracles, so had he. We both concluded that God had more work for us to do. He claimed that he was too bad to die, so God kept him around to get his act together. Yet we agreed, Dr. Martin Luther King, when he said, "I know somehow that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars." He is husband, father, relative, friend, teacher, preacher, writer, singer, student, neighbor, and much more. Yes, he is caring, giving, understanding, kind, supportive. He is agape, love. Ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Thomas.
Thank you so much for that remarkable introduction. I'll try to be some of that. The children have warmed my heart for at least two reasons. I'll share the first one with you, and then I'll come back to the second one. As I was sitting on a plane this morning coming from Philadelphia, I was reading a book entitled Parting the Waters by Taylor Branch, and it struck me more than one time that practically all of the freedom riders and the key players in the civil rights movement in the 60s began their career in churches and in chapels, praying and singing as children for their parents and for others who were inspired by the gifts which they brought. And it reminded me of my own background coming up in a Baptist church in Louisiana. And as I watched them, I thought how awesome and how big this room must be to children who have to stand in front of all of us and make their presentation. And my mind rushed back to a stained glass window in that old church back in Louisiana, and I always thought that was such an imposing rose window. It was indeed the biggest window I had ever seen. And of course, my eyes would look upon stained glass windows all over the world, and finally, a couple of weeks ago, I got back to that church, and I stood in front of that window, and it was so tiny. Our perspectives are enlarged as we go along, but there is a place where it begins. I went to the Philadelphia airport this morning at about 6 a.m., and I stood before a smiling representative of Northwest Airlines, and she said, "Mr. Thomas, didn't you get the message your flight had been canceled?" And I said, "Well, it can't be. I've got to be at Augsburg." So I scurried around, and I found an American airline flight that went through Chicago, and I I reached the airport here, and I was in my car at about 10:15. Now I'll tell you why the second part of why their presentation really impacted upon me, because I noticed that they were making their presentation without a note. What great sophistication. What great learning. Some pretty far out concepts in Lift Every Voice and Sing. And I was kind of afraid because my baggage is still down at the terminal at American Airlines along with my notes for this. So they gave me a great deal of inspiration. I thought to myself, well, if they could do it, I can too. So I am very, very delighted to be here. And I'd like to share with you from 2 Kings, the 7th chapter, beginning with verse 3 and following. Now there were 4 men who were lepers at the entrance to the gate, and they said to one another, "Why do we sit here till we die? If we say, 'Let us enter the city,' the famine is in the city, and we shall die there. And if we sit here, we die also. So now come, let us go over to the camp of the Syrians. If they spare our lives, we live. And if they kill us, we shall but die." So they arose at twilight and went to the camp of the Syrians. But when they came to the edge of the camp of the Syrians, behold, there was no one there. For the Lord had made the army of the Syrians hear the sound of chariots and of horses and the sound of a great army, so that they said to one another, "Behold, the king of Israel has hired against us the king of the Hittites and the kings of Egypt to come upon us." So they fled away in the twilight and forsook their tents, their horses, and their asses, leaving the camp as it were, and fled for their lives. And when these lepers came to the edge of the camp, they went into a tent and ate and drank, and they carried off silver and gold and clothing and went and hid them. And they came back and entered another tent and carried off things from it and went and hid them. Then they said to one another, "We are not doing right. This is a day of good news. If we are silent and wait until the morning light, punishment will overcome us. Now, therefore, let us go and tell the king's household." From Los Angeles, where I was about 3 days ago, to Philadelphia, to Minneapolis, people all over the United States today are celebrating the life of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. It is fitting that such a celebration be held, but according to some, unless we pay very close attention to the message of Dr. King, to the essence of what he was saying, along with some other voices who were very much a part of the struggle he was involved in, what we'll get is just another national hero placed among the pantheon of heroes and heroines of our country, safely tucked away somewhere, perhaps on a calendar. And all we'll get is a day off where we can rest and think and perhaps do nothing. Many are calling us to think more about his unfinished agenda. I can now go to a water fountain and I can drink water, and I don't have to endure having a sign over that fountain that says colored. I can go to the same bathroom with anybody in this room and do what people do in bathrooms and not have to worry about a sign that says white over the door. I can get on an interstate bus and I can ride from here to Chicago and sit in the very first seat that's marked for passengers and not worry about being told to go to the back. But were those things really the significant items which Martin Luther King was seeking? Probably not. There are some other items, and those items are part of the unfinished agenda. Racism, number one, is still a very rampant institution in our society, in our country. You think not? Think about what happened in Boston a couple of months ago, when a man named Stewart frantically called the police department and announced that a black man had come up to him and his wife, pulled out a pistol and shot his pregnant wife and shot him in the abdomen. Think about what happened to the reputation of an entire black community. It was crucified by the press. Think about the legions of police officers who were unleashed on that community looking for a black gunman. Just on the word of a sick white man who had killed his own wife, his unborn baby, and would soon kill himself. Think about how the Boston Police Department suppressed evidence, good intelligence reports, which it had, and allowed the whole community to endure national shame. And you tell me that's not racism. Think about the state of Louisiana today. There was just a Republican caucus to nominate a senator to run against J. Bennett Johnson for the United States Senate in the Republican primary. Think about a Louisiana legislator whose last name is Dukes, who's from a suburban community of New Orleans, who is the president of the National Association for the Advancement of White People, an ex-Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, who could run in a duly constituted state election and sit in the Louisiana legislature spouting racism with the support of the majority of people in his legislative district. He actually could have been elected as a candidate for the United States Senate. Think about a public district attorney in Camden, New Jersey, fearing that he's not going to get reelected or repositioned in his district, creates a story that 3 black gunmen shot at him while he was parked at a stoplight. turned the whole Camden City Police Department against an innocent black community. They went from house to house, from tavern to tavern, on the word of a sick man, lining up innocent people, arresting people whose only crime that day was that they went for a stroll down the street. This is America in 1990. There is a lot of unfinished business on the civil rights agenda. And contrary to what I heard on Meet the Press yesterday, racism is still in our society. But Martin Luther King also concerned himself with poor people, with people who were so socially dislocated from the national norm, whatever that was, that they had come to feel that they had no real part in the society in which they lived and had their being. And he said that we would pay a high price for that as a culture. While going through the Port Authority bus terminal in New York City, in the first week of January 1989, I saw a commotion in one of the corners of the bus terminal where there were a lot of street people assembled. That's where they go to keep warm because they have no homes. And it seemed like a woman by the name of Sally Ann was holding forth. She called out to all of the onlookers, "This is a show. It's a Hollywood production. It's being put on free of charge. We want to let you know that the whole goddamn world does not care about our plight and our condition." She went on, "I am nobody. I am nobody," she said about 5 times, getting louder and louder each time. And I wondered about Martin Luther King's words and social dislocation, that whole topic, where people, after being told perhaps a few times that they're nothing, and perhaps due to certain accidents and incidents in life, they are reduced another notch downward, 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 come to actually accept. Maybe there are causative words that are being spoken. They come to believe in the grating and denigrating acts that occur in their lives. And finally, they too say what the rest of us are saying about them. Isn't it sad? Isn't it awful that people actually allow themselves to be that way? Perhaps they come to be wild things. And perhaps the wilding that we heard about in Central Park, in all of the communities all across America where houses are barred up and people live like prisoners in their own homes, perhaps that is just an indication of things to come. No, it's more than perhaps. According to a recent study that was issued by the federal government entitled Our Common Destiny, Black people in America today are at the same place they were in the 50s. Oh, there are a few of us working on PhDs and have them. Some of us have got VCRs and BMWs, the very alphabets of success. But for the masses of Black and poor people in America, things have not changed very much. I read about some of the young people who participated in the freedom rides and endured some of the most brutal savagery known to Western folks. I read about how they just flung their futures away. The thousands of high school kids we thought that we had seen for the first time when the kids in Soweto in South Africa rebelled and were plummeted by police officers. We thought that we had seen for the first time something like that. But the history book reminded me that in Birmingham, Alabama, high school kids had walked away from their schools and walked away from their parents, and they had committed themselves to jail. Even before they sent an application off to college, there was something on their record that said that they had been to jail, and they wore those records like a badge of honor, because already they knew that there was something more valuable in life than a good name, one that doesn't take a risk. Those young people who left Johnson C. Smith University and Howard University, and some went from Yale. They went from law school and they went from medical school, and they got on buses and they went south to get their heads knocked open. Some of them who threw themselves into teaching people who couldn't even read, who couldn't even sign their names, who prepared them to vote, endured jail so many times and deprivation, because they saw something higher and nobler in life than some of the things that we shamefully cry out for today. And their agenda was full human dignity for as many people as they could achieve it for. And I think we dishonor them, we dishonor King, we dishonor that whole movement when we don't reflect adequately upon those concerns, and when we don't dedicate ourselves to bringing about social rearrangements. I heard somebody say to a young person the other day, "You want to be a teacher? Teachers don't make any money." And I said, "But they teach people." And the person said, "You ought to get into electronics or something. That's where it's going to be in the future. You ought to get into one of the scientific fields. There you can make money, you can make a name for yourself, you can make a good life. You want to be a social worker? Lord have mercy. You want to spend the rest of your life chasing people through the projects?" Those things that make life better for people aren't going to get you a lot of money. They might get you fame, and they may get you killed. Well, let me conclude, because I was told that you have to get back to class or something. First time I came here, I had about 5 minutes. And I assured the dean of chapel the day that I wanted to preach until I finished. But you are spared, because I did say I left my notes in the bags. When I was a young child, we lived in a place where it was a breeding ground for fireflies. We used to call them lightning bugs. And I was always curious about those fireflies or lightning bugs. And one day I asked my mother, I said, why do they light up like that? And my mother had a third grade education, but she was a wise person. She knew a lot about a lot. And she gave me the best answer that I could ever get. She thought about it for a moment. She looked around, she pondered it, and finally she said, it's just in them. It's just in them. Now what I've said today casts a dim pall over our lives together as people in this country. But it's no dim pall than was cast over the lives of the people I've been just talking about. But there was something inside of those people, and I said that most of them started in the church. They started in chapel. They left little Christian colleges often, and they went out almost on a religious mission, if you will. And no matter how grim it all got for them, no matter how many times the policeman's club came down upon their heads, no matter how many times they felt the savages of dog bites or cattle prods, they always seemed to come back for more because it was in them. And so we say with so many, don't get weary with your well-doing. Don't get weary when you see that your plans in life are not leading to a great house out in Lake Minnetonka or wherever your lake is. Don't get weary with your well-doing. There is always somebody around who can walk with you and talk with you and sing with you and be with you and celebrate with you and be for the right with you. And you will know that you are also furthering the continuing agenda of our Lord Jesus Christ, for whom Martin Luther King claimed to be a follower. God bless you as you seek to do your part in this agenda. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Reverend Thomas for that most continuing agenda, one that will continue within my heart. Also to be mindful that not only was Dr. Martin Luther King a follower of God, so must all of us. At this time, listed on our program as a pledge, and one of the things that I've enjoyed in the past years when we plan our Martin Luther King program is to include our students, and more in particular this year to make some recognition to our student leaders. I'd like for them to stand at the time. It's our interim period, and unfortunately our full session of folks are not here with us, but I'd like for our student leaders with us today to stand. And I didn't give them this part, but I think they can speak loud enough if they would introduce themselves and the organization that they represent. Ladies and gentlemen, the Augsburg College student leaders. And why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Reverend and President Charles S. My name is Holly Reagan, and I'm the Senate co-governor. My name is Lyra Kirby, and I'm a co-leader of the Bisexual and Gay Lesbian Student Organization. My name is Leah Ahmed, and I'm the president of Four College.
I'm Mike Cuddy, I'm president of
I'm Christine Edison, representative for Global Awareness.
I'm Jeff Monk, president of Augsburg College.
And I don't know if there are any other leaders that want to join the group. Okay. At this time, I'd like to present this group to the Augsburg community family, and they are charged with a special mission, and they will lead us in their pledge.
In honor of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and work, I pledge to do everything that I can to make America and the world a place where equality, justice, freedom, peace, and love will grow and flourish. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word. Our unity and struggle is profound, principled, and forever. I commit myself to living the dream, making the reality by loving, not hating, showing understanding, not anger, making peace, not war, and helping freedom exist for all people everywhere. It begins with me. Choices, challenges, and changes begin with me. Through love, I commit to this pledge. On behalf of the Augsburg College student leaders, I would like to take this opportunity to express our gratitude and celebration of the rich diversity and growing equality within our community.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Augsburg campus community leaders, thank you. I'd like to also further encourage all of our student leaders and those students within the audience to get involved with our campus activities. There's so much to do. And one of the things that I think is always important to know that it does begin with each of us. Many times we wait for someone else to lead the way, but sometimes we must be trailblazers on our own. I know that on many occasions there's some disappointment that comes when you're in charge of a group and you start off with grand ideas and you don't get the full cooperation of those who are also in the group. But in looking at leadership, which I think is also important for our recognition and our understanding, our reflection on the day when we look at the life of Dr. Martin Luther King, is that leadership is being able to follow. And I learned that perhaps in working with the students in the Black Student Union, when the president took office, he finally said, I think I've lost all of my responsibility now. I realized I speak for the people, and the things that I was fighting for, now I really listen to other voices. The other voices doesn't mean that you give up your strength. It doesn't mean that you give up even your commitment. It also really simply means that you follow. And there's some really outstanding young and old, because we have diverse in age, we have diverse in our religious preference, we have a diversity in our ethnic backgrounds. It's all here at Augsburg College, and I think when we unite together, we too will make the difference. I encourage our leaders and our leader supporters to be able to walk hand in hand, to be able to look to the stars, and to always know from the Lord cometh our help. At this time, we'll have comments and recognition of our visitors from the president of the college, Dr. Charles Anderson.
I'd like to begin by thanking all of those who prepared and arranged this fine convocation, especially Anita Gay and the members of the Black Student Union. And very special thanks to the program participants. I don't think we've had a choir quite as good as this in a very particular way. For heaven's sake, it was a marvelous addition, and we're grateful to Ms. Jean Dixon, and of course especially to Pastor Jim Thomas. Just about a month ago to this day, in fact it was December 10th, and I think this is the 14th of this month, I sat in the auditorium, the aula of the University of Oslo, as a guest of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, and witnessed the presentation and heard some of the comments associated with that. The presentation, as you know, was given to the exiled head spiritual leader of the Tibetan community, a person whom 6 million Buddhists happen to believe is the reincarnation of the Buddha, the Dalai Lama. This was a moving and interesting experience, but in the auditorium, my thoughts quite honestly turned to another award, for it was in that space that Dr. Martin Luther King received the Nobel Peace Prize some years ago as the great proponent of nonviolent direct action as a means of effecting social change. In the modern era, 3 persons are associated primarily and understood and credited for following this particular path: Mohandas Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and the Dalai Lama. These are 3 persons who have marked the world, and it's of interest to me that all of them are persons of color. In thinking of Dr. King and his many speeches, one that stands out for me as sort of summarizing what he was about was his famous speech, one of the most famous in modern American history, the one that was made at the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., sometimes called the I Have a Dream speech, and it also is called Let Freedom Ring speech. You all know it, I hope. At one point there, he said, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skins, but by the content of their character. Last night on television, I saw one of Dr. King's children, a beautiful young woman, now an officer in the King Foundation, receive an award for the foundation and in memory of Dr. King. She is obviously grown, no longer the little child her father knew, but the dream of her father is only partly realized. Some persons are still judged by color and not character, but it is the nature of a dream or of a vision that it leads one into the future. We still strive for a society envisioned at the Washington Monument. And I want Augsburg to be a leader in this continuing march, and I pledge our continuing best efforts to bring this about. We thank you all for coming. We are adjourned. We will have after the benediction. David. Anita, as a wonderful staff person, is trying to keep the president out of trouble. She said, be sure to welcome all of our visitors. We have a lot of them, and I recognize that, obviously, and it was my error. You are all welcome. I know some people on this side, and there are many that have come associated with this fine group. I recognize a parent. As a grandfather, you can tell a parent from 100 yards. You are all welcome. Have I done that? All right. Thank you.
The president usually does have the last word and should, but today I would just like to share some of Martin Luther King's last words as our words to be sent forth. This was delivered on April 3rd, the night before he was killed. I don't know what will happen now. We have got difficult days ahead, but it does not matter with me because I've been to the mountaintop. Like anyone else, I would like to live a long life, but I'm not concerned with that. I just want to do God's will, and God has allowed me to go up to the mountain. I see the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. I am happy tonight that I am not worried about anything. I am not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. You all know the story of Rip Van Winkle. Everyone remembers that Winkle slept for 20 years. But what is important is that when he went up on the mountain to sleep, there was a picture of King George hanging in the town. When he came down, there was a picture of George Washington in its place. Rip Van Winkle slept through a revolution, but we cannot afford to remain asleep. Our world is as a neighborhood. We must all learn to live together, or we will all perish as fools. Go in peace, serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
There is a reception in the atrium.